This is not just another video on how to make agar. This one is about troubleshooting and testing, because somehow I made killer telephone agar, and that doesn't mean great agar that really grows, but agar that has nothing that grows on it. When something goes wrong, how do you recover? How do you find out what caused the problem, or do you even care? It may not matter as long as you fix the problem. My agar stopped growing anything for 2 months. It took me a couple of weeks to notice I even had a problem. A week to allow for initial growth, another to see if there really was a problem, waiting for growth, and a few more weeks to troubleshoot and try out the first change that I thought of, and that didn't work. But a careful review of all my notes, photos, and dish labels, and I could find a solution that led to a better guess. And then it took a couple of days to get new materials through Amazon and make new agar, and then testing it out. And I found success, so my agar was good again. I ran some side-by-side tests with tissue clones on the old and new agars. The new agar grew, the old agar didn't, and I thought that was the end of the story. But I had made some posts on Discord back in February of 2024 to share a warning that I had a shipment of telephone agar powder that was bad for our hobby purposes. And then I did the same on someone's YouTube video channel, and his wise response was, "Sorry, that doesn't make any sense. Maybe one of your containers has residual chemicals in it. Real telephone brand is distributed worldwide and commonly used for culinary purpose. I doubt that it is the brand's fault. You are doing something wrong. Don't blame it on the agar." And so I thought about that, and I took that sensible comment to heart. I have plenty of spare time, so I ran another side-by-side experiment to check if the TP problem was real or caused by my process. And what I'm going to show you is what I tried to document as I went along with this side-by-side, trying to keep just one variable changing in this test. And now it's 6 months later, so I'll try and recreate events as best I remember them while editing this video together. I tried to find out if there was a date when things stopped growing, and one of the sources of information I had was the labeling on my petri dishes. So this example may not be proper, but I'd been tracking all the transfers. A clone was created in April, and then it was transferred once in August, third transfer in December. Up until the start of 2024, I'd been successful with several swabs and, of course, agar transfers, and clones of tissue had also been growing. With this data, it was pretty obvious that things began to fail right away in the beginning of January, and nothing would grow. The clones, transfers, from dish to dish, everything failed. In fact, I was grabbing the same initial transfer of material and moving it across different dishes, and it just wasn't growing at all. So after gathering all the information off of petri dish labels, I then turned to my lab notebook and looked for agar recipes, and I found that I'd made a double batch on January 10th, 80 plates of agar that, as it turns out, nothing would grow on. Just following one variety through the troubleshooting, it was swabbed in December and grew out, and a transfer was made, and that was growing successfully. And then I got into the 80 plates of agar that weren't good in January, and on the 20th this was moved on to that bad agar batch and didn't grow, so I moved it, the transfer square, to another plate on February 7th, and that one still didn't grow. So then I created a new batch of agar. I began to suspect, well, maybe it's the glass petri dishes because those were new to me, but had been used previously, and maybe they had fungicide or something in them. So I went back to my screw top PP5 plastic dishes, and on the 17th that piece of agar was transferred, but still didn't grow either on the 17th or the 27th, failed both times. And then at the beginning of March, I was suspecting the agar itself, and I got a new batch of different agar material and created another group of petri dishes, of which this photo is one of them. And on the transfer on the 8th, this same piece of agar that had been transferred through all these different non-growth plates started growing again. So now that I had good agar plates, I transferred all the tissue and agar bits from 29 dead telephone agar plates to the new, I call them fit agar plates. It's a fitness agar was the name of the product. And some recovered, about 45% lived, but others died. And these two plates were the same tissue culture, same source. One survived, one died. I now know that there was something wrong with my bags of telephone agar, but back then I was still proving it to myself. So once I had working agar again, I made a couple side-by-side petries of clone tissue using new fit and old telephone. When cloning, I make 4 samples per plate, and once they grow out, I pick the best looking mycelium to transfer. So there's 4 pieces in each plate of the same tissue. The fit grew and the telephone did not. Mycelium did grow on some of the tissue pieces themselves, but not onto the telephone agar. I also noticed that the telephone agar might have condensation on the inside of the dish, but the agar itself was cracking and had shrunk down to a thin layer. Let's look at the factors or variables that can affect making agar. My recipe is based on Yoshi's advice from Dinospores. In this graphic, I use the top line with 10 grams of agar, 7.5 of light malt extract, 500 milliliters of water, and I used to use yeast too, but with the pace I move at, I just don't need the growth speed, and it never completely dissolved for me, so I had set yeast aside for a while, and that's not a factor. The light malt extract is the same stuff, the same batch, 1 pound that I've been using since I started 2 years ago, so that is not a factor. The water comes from my RO filter system. I've been using that for all the runs since starting the hobby. And the only other things that touch or go near the agar are, I just got 4 glass media bottles, new, with stir bars, and numbers 1 and 2 have been used. And if you're wondering what's on the inside of the bottles, well, paper is a cheap water scavenger during storage. It's like a silicone pack, so I just use paper towel inside each cleaned up bottle. I've got glass petri dishes. They're new to me as of October of 23, and the glass petries were used when I got them at a school. They had unknown residuals on the glass from the previous user, but that seemed unlikely. But it was a biology class or agribusiness class of some sort. So they could have used chemicals with fungicide maybe. The petries had been cleaned up and dishwashed and have made successful grows. So that seemed unlikely, but was a possibility. And maybe I finally used a subset that had had a persistent residual of some sort. I also use a graduated cylinder to measure out the water, but that was also used previously and had been successful. I use grafting tape since November of 23, but that doesn't touch the agar itself. I also started using a flow hood in October of 23. It was a used one, and I had cleaned out the inside and then sprayed Lysol into the blower on startup and let it run for a while in order to remove the musty smell. It tested out okay, had no contaminations, and had worked well for previous grows before things started going bad. Plates then go into an incubator at 77 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's been used in the past with plenty of success. So what's my testing hypothesis? I've been told telephone brand is distributed worldwide and commonly used for culinary purpose, so doubt that it's the brand's fault. So going into testing, I assumed the problem wasn't the brand of agar, but that the processing or how I make the agar can make it killer agar. I had been making telephone agar in a pan on the stove, and then I saw a post that you could save time by placing the dry ingredients into a media bottle, add the water cap, and go directly into the pressure cooker. Let the boil mix the ingredients. So I adopted that. And I switched to hot water in a bottle, dumping my telephone ingredients in, cap it, put it in the PC, let the boil mix things up. Never made any notes about when I made the change. And I'd also heard advice about the length of the PC cycle, going from 30 and then to 45 minutes and then up to 60 minutes, with longer being better. So I'd increased my cycle time to 75 minutes. And for a couple of months, even before this problem, the telephone agar was not setting up hard. You expect this at cleanup, where you can just pick the whole puck out of your plate, but it had been a soft paste at cleanup for me, and I needed a plastic plate scraper to do the job. So I had been increasing the amount of agar I used in a 500 milliliter batch from 10 and up to 12 grams, and it still wasn't setting hard. Soft agar shouldn't cause growth issues, but it did make me wonder about the quality of the agar. My supply of telephone agar was running low, so a new shipment was received on September 30th of 23, and I just stored it away and proceeded to use up the old telephone supply, and that was gone by December. And then the first sign of having an agar problem was on the January 7th transfer. And I did not note when I started using the new shipment, but the timing made sense. This is where the new telephone agar batch was implemented and things stopped growing, so that seemed to make sense that it was the agar. Pressure cooking cycle time, it rose from 40 to 75 minutes, and that had been successful. Started using the new media bottles, at least 2 of them, and those had been working. I'd gone from screw top plastic PP5 dishes to using glass, poured ahead of time and then sterilized inside ball jars. But I had started using the hood and pouring when the media bottle reached a temperature of 118 Fahrenheit, and did one batch in PP5s that way and then switched over to glass. So it didn't seem to be a factor. Trying to troubleshoot things, I had gone back to the plastic containers thinking maybe the glass had contamination on them, but things still failed, and I was still using the same batch of telephone agar. And then when I switched to agar and the fitness agar came in, the first time I made it, I used the old processing, and it was too much agar in the mix, and I made a solid chunk. I reduced the amount of agar that I was using to 8 grams in a batch, and then that's when things started growing. This video topic is broken into at least 5 parts. Next will be continuing to weigh out portions and mix up the various different runs of agar.